Everyone right now is demoing finance agents, forecasting your P&L, auto-reconciling your accounts, writing the narrative for you. What nobody talks about is the 6 months of integration work that has to happen before any of that is trustworthy. Today, we go under the hood with the person who builds that layer. My guest is Mike Casey, who leads data integration for the EPM platform. Mike, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Nihar. Great talking to you today.
Would you mind introducing yourself for the folks that may not know who you are?
Sure. So Mike Casey, I've been at Oracle now for almost 3 decades. Started off in the Oracle CPM, worked on some activity-based costing products, and then, once moved into the Oracle EPM group, really has focused on integration from that point on. So it's been, 2 decades or more of doing the integration work in terms of, how to get data into and out of and around an EPM. So that's where I am. That's where I sit, and take it from there.
Oracle's AI strategy in EPM, in my experience and what you guys have shared with us, is that there's really 3 pieces. There are the agents built natively into the application, assistants that you assemble inside AI Agent Studio, and then an interoperability path that lets you bring in outside model and through APIs. And under all that sits a governance layer. Of course, there's the predictive machine learning and the analytics side of things, along with IPM insights. But when we think about agents and that sort of thing and autonomous finance operations, what's the real gap between that headline and what the environment can actually support today?
Today we've got a lot of the tools that allow you to do your predictive analytics. We've got the machine learning. We're beginning to build these agents. And then, as the agents mature and we talk about, agentic experiences where agents work together, that's really where we're going to begin to see, this complete autonomous finance where the system will go out and figure out what data you need, how to, perform the close and, set up all these, different steps to get you through the process. So I think it's an iterative process where we're going from these pieces to where we're going to, get to this autonomous finance, endpoint. So that's the goal. And I think we're building the pieces to get us there. So that's kind of what I see, which is, what do you need to do to get there? And so, with the agents that do certain things, identify issues, agents that can run processes, from start to finish, but then really, having these agents learn the rules about your business so they can autonomously go make changes, make fixes, post data, do journals, and do those things, based off a set of instructions that we give these agents so that they can eventually learn how to do this autonomously. We're getting there. This is the first phase of it, but that's really the goal, which is, putting these pieces in place so you can do that.
So when you make this actionable for customers, and is this like a flip the switch to the next quarterly update or monthly update?
We're at the starting point of that. We're at the agentic agents, where the agents will go perform actions that are more like an assistant. And then once you progress beyond that, that's where we get into the autonomous point. And we're at a good starting point, I think, where we can provide documents to the agents that explain how to do things. And then the agents will perform actions based on the rules that you define in the documents. Those documents can help, the system decide how to build the application. These explanations and rules can instruct the agents how to perform actions on their own. So we're at the starting point where we can begin to do this within the system, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think that kind of lines up where AI seems in general overall. Like I use ChatGPT and Cloud every day, and I don't work less. In fact, I think we work more. I'm waiting for the day that AI takes my job, but we're not quite there yet. Is it kind of the path forward just to use? Is it going to be something that customers can select and have to worry about, like where they're spending tokens and manage that cost, or is that something that's really just all handled behind the scenes?
There is that component to it. When you pick the LLM, it will figure out, what sort of usage that you're requiring to perform your work. And that is, the usage model that will be presented to the customer. So that's something that is, available now. It's something that will continue to evolve over time, which is as you use the AI, how do you get, as you consume the AI, what does that mean in terms of, your bottom line cost for using these systems, within, Oracle EPM. So that's going to continue to evolve. We do have a starting point for that. I don't know if I could explain it right now. There's credits that you get for that. So, that's a big component of this, which is as you do these more complicated things, what does that mean to what it costs you to do that?
Sure. Yeah. And besides the cost, also like the quality of output, depending on the LLM may also differ. And so, or the type of output being the right fit for the question. So it's interesting to see, when I use personally, I use Claude for most things business related. I use ChatGPT for a lot of personal things. And so it's interesting to see what kind of outputs you get with the same prompts. So interesting to see how that turns into more of like an art than a science. And so, as we think about charting the course and, adopting new technology like this, every time there's a major transformation, it seems like there's a lot of excitement at first. And then once we get, trying to go to production always seems to be the challenge. And at least in my experience, I found that, the integration and the data model is really that foundation that determines success. And that's kind of your sweet spot. This is your world. So I want to spend, time talking about, how does, things like the chart of accounts alignment, between ERP and EPM affect the quality of the agent outputs?
That certainly is a big component, and we've really begun to incorporate EDM into supporting a lot of these initiatives on our side. EDM really defines what things look like on the ERP side, what things look like on the EPM side, how those things interact and map. And so it really gives you a single source of truth between what you have in ERP, what you have in EPM, and how those pieces map across them. I don't think you could do this without something like, consistent metadata across all your different sources, because you need to understand, what this account in this system means versus what it means in EPM. What's this KPI if you can't relate it back to what it is on the source. So that may be one of the most important things, which is a consistent, chart of accounts or consistent metadata between all your systems that are, utilizing AI to get a consistent answer across them. So if you don't, understand what account one means in EPM versus what that really is on the source system, it's hard to, reconcile all the different pieces and make those decisions, that you need the AI to make for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's especially with AI, since it seems like the answers are really they vary depending on context, probability, the time of day you ask, how the agent's feeling that day. I feel like that's even more important to have that structure between the two. What I guess on the contrary side, like what type of what type of things can we think about right now as we're maturing with AI agent development and keep making sure that structure is aligned up front? And what happens when it's misaligned?
You probably may start where you don't have everything aligned and you're going to come up with some funky answers in terms of, the AI can give you an answer in EPM, but when you need to relate it back to where that data came from, you may have a problem doing that if it's not aligned. So, that may be the first decision you have to take if you're going to jump full into AI that crosses your different domains, whether it's EPM and ERP. You're going to have to get that aligned first. If it's not aligned, you could perform something in EPM, and then you try to drill through back to what that source amount means, and it may not find it. If you're not aligned, you're going to have a difficulty reconciling between all the different pieces. Is kind of what I think is going to happen.
Yeah.
But maybe that's the first step you have to take when you start with your AI. You have the question, if you want to, implement AI in the next 90 days, what do you need to do? It's more than just what's your strategy. Okay, figure out what your strategy is, but then what's the metadata and the data that you need to do that? And so the alignment of it, I think, is almost one of the most important things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I can foresee a scenario like if you're trying to drill back from EPM to Fusion, and the source is different. What does that do to the user's trust in the agent's answer, right?
We can do that today with data integration because we allow you to perform that mapping. So we know how that was mapped, but it's going to be even more important to maybe not have to do as much of that mapping if you can align this metadata up front. So, we handle it today just because we know that's how a lot of customers operate, which is their CPM chart of accounts may not always match the chart of accounts on the ERP side. But the idea is that we want to have a closer relationship with all the different pieces so that it's more consistent across all your different pillars of ERP, EPM, and operational systems.
Yeah, well, it's good to know that it can be installed on either the front end or the back end in that case, as long as we can leverage that context from the mappings. Is there any kind of integration work that is completely invisible to the CFO but totally determines like whether the AI is usable? Just trying to see if you got any examples or stories of where it can
invisible to the CFO. I think we try to make almost all of it invisible to the CFO with the tools we have today, just so it doesn't seem so difficult. You set up your integrations, you tell where the data is coming from, how to transform it, and where it's going. It just shows up in your system. You push a button, it's all automated on the back end. I think that's the goal of this whole thing, which is, you don't have to show anybody how it's set up, how it's configured. You can if you need to, but it should all be done behind the scenes so it seems, mostly seamless. And the AI, gets to the point where it can figure out the relationship between your ERP and your EPM and how that mapping is set up and do all that work for you. So you don't have to necessarily have this gigantic project where you figure out how everything is transformed between the different systems. So, using EDM, that's front loading a lot of that transformation and relationships. If you don't use it, then you still have to define what those translations are between the different systems. So, you still have to do it. It just depends on where you want to take the hit. Do you do it up front in like EDM? Do you do it, downstream in EPM? It's just, where do you spend the time to do that? And hopefully AI will help us perform that process even easier going forward. So you don't have to spend as much time doing that.
I think I heard somewhere, and this is true with us too, is that, probably a third to a half of our customers are non-Oracle ERP customers. And they could use SAP or some other ERP, but still use Oracle EPM. Do you foresee that that invisible integration is still something that's possible within EPM if we're having to bring in data from third-party systems?
I still think so, because you use the same tools. You can still use EDM to align your metadata across all of them. If not, you can still set up your mapping within EPM to map from those different systems. So I think it's still the same type of thing where you can use the appropriate tool in the right place to get this set up for you. I think that's the strength of EPM, which is, you can certainly use it anywhere you want to attach it.
Reconciliations and doing those continuously, right, would really kill that end of period kind of fire drill. But that only works if the data lands continuously. So are there any changes that have to be made upstream to make that real?
I saw one, I don't know if they're one of your customers or not, but they put a process in place that will clean the data before it gets to us. And so what that meant was that they would, take a view of the data coming in, they would run it up against all the mapping rules and all the data to make sure that it was going to map correctly. And then they would clean it up and then submit it for real. So, and they used a complete AI model to do this. So they would download the mapping and the LCM, and they would run it through the big model to say, where is this data load going to fail on me? And then it would identify where it's going to fail, and then it would generate mapping rules that you could then review and then upload in the system so that you would have a clean data load and do that all up front. So it was a pretty cool process they used, find the errors ahead of time, and then they would have a clean data load, and they had an automated process where they had like 200 ERPs, and they would load all, that may tell you who it is, but that would load all their data into EPM, but it came in clean. So that was the idea, was get everything clean. They used, AI to check all the different components and the models and the mappings, make sure everything was correct, and then load the data. And that, I think, was a cool use of AI to make sure the whole process was complete before they got to the point of a failure on, the data load, like the starting point of your whole process.
Yeah, it's way more elegant than when I was a consultant and I would just create a bucket in the hierarchy to load all the kickouts to.
Yeah, that's right. So they really did a pretty neat job of finding the kickouts ahead of time. And then the LLM would generate the mapping rules, and it would give you a mapping file. You would just have to go, approve it, and then it would go through, load the mapping rules. And then, it was really pretty cool. It took a lot of heartache out of the system of loading data and then having failures and having to deal with those after the fact.
Right. So, in terms of like when it makes sense to use the native agents that Oracle's releasing versus kind of building your own with something like AI Agent Studio, how do you position that decision for a customer? Because, if we spend 3 months developing something that Oracle releases next cycle, there could be a trade-off there. So what is the decision point on whether we should build it versus use what's already available?
That goes back to the whole AI strategy, which is, what problem are you trying to solve with AI? So, and then do we have a solution for it with our agents or with our built-in AI, with our machine learning or predictive analytics? What's the problem you're trying to solve, and what solutions do we have available right now?
Are there any examples of some of the agents that you guys can share publicly that might be coming soon or that are already available?
The account assistants that help you go through the process of where do I have problems? How do I make these updates? The consolidation assistant takes you the whole consolidation process. It's really a conversational approach to consolidating your books within consolidation. So right now we have a lot of assistants. We're really working on some of these bigger agents later in the year for things like the planning agent will take you through the whole planning process. That's probably the biggest one we have that's in the works right now. In each of the tools in reporting, we have a lot of assistance in reporting that allow you to, converse with the data, generate reports and forms, look for forms that are available. So let's say you're in the system and you don't know where a specific form is, it can help you find, the form that you're looking for to use. It can help you, build a smart view sheet for some data that you're looking at, add a different chart or graph into smart view. So, right now it's a lot of assistance. As we progress through this, it will be more of an agentic experience where we hook the assistants together, and then more of these big solutions like the planning agent that's coming out later in the year.
If a finance, organization gave us like, a 90-day strategy to get AI ready, or they've had this kind of initiative, what do you think are like maybe the top 3 things they should focus on? I know we discussed, the data governance, the data mappings, the models themselves. Are there 2 or 3 things that you would say you've got to make sure that these are right first, and then we can actually get started?
So to get started, I number one, we go back to the whole strategy of what problem are we trying to solve, and then you could say, whatever that problem is, what data do you need to have clean data in order to allow the AI to make the right decisions? So then that gets back to the whole EDM discussion about, is your data clean? Is everything in place where you can do this? If you're using predictive analytics, is there enough history available so that the system can make enough, predictions based on, what data is in the system? So it's really, what problem you're trying to solve, is the data available? And then if it is, then which of the pieces that we want to implement? So it could be, one of these agentic solutions. It could be machine learning or predictive analytics. AI covers so many different things. It isn't just things that you run through an LLM. It's, machine learning and data analysis and, predictive analytics, and then the Gen AI type things that assist you in what you need to do.
Yeah, I mean, if I could try to recap, what I heard distinctly was make sure we identify the problem that we're trying to solve. That's number 1, right? With anything that we try to do, whether it's AI or not. Number 2 sounds like it's the data prep and making sure that we understand, the metadata, the mappings, et cetera. And then the 3, I feel like, depending on the use case, if it's history of data for predictive analytics, or if it's, defining the process for an individual reconciler or planner, I think that's probably at least a somewhat of a foundation, and then we can get into the individual use cases to go deeper.
At least get started with predictive analytics, something that's built into our system. So, IPM, implement IPM, implement predictive analytics. Look at something that's available today, which you can almost push a button on our side and start getting some use out of us. So that's a way to get an easy win. Implement something that's available directly today within the system, and then go look at the agents that are available that you can download from EPM and upload into the studio. Maybe there's something there that will meet the need of one of your issues that you're having on your side. But I would definitely say, implement the features that we have today, turn them on at least, and that gets you started, with AI within EPM, and then, see how that lines up with your strategy. I mean, Profitability's got their assistant. Account Recs has a lot of assistance, certainly in reporting. Everyone has got some AI that's available in the system that you can easily turn on within EPM. Start with that, move on to the other pieces.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. How do you see, if you had to, guess long term, like how does this change the role of people in finance and accounting and how they interact with data and how they interact with these applications?
I think what it can do for you is speed up your decision making. So you can use AI to answer questions or to do summaries. The human still is the one that at the end of the day is going to be the decision maker for many of these, processes. So it's going to provide better information for the user of the system is kind of what I see. And it's going to help, speed up that process. I mean, with AI, I haven't had a decrease in what I do. It's basically, I feel like I have more work than I can ever do.
Sure.
But then you're kind of like, since you have so much to do, you've got to rely on AI to help summarize and to do things for you that you may not have had the time to do. So, things like, reading the what's new every month. You can have AI go summarize the what's new for you. So if there's something within planning that you're, curious about, maybe it'll tell you these are the things in planning that may be of interest to you instead of reading the entire what's new document. So it's really, what are the things I do and how can I use AI to, make it easier to do that? One of the things I showed at the Sunday Symposium was here's a prompt that you can use to analyze your integration log files. Boy, the time that you spend doing that is almost unlimited, but this, little prompt will go through and perform the analysis of you, tell you a summary of everything, what the problem is, how to fix it. And so, I really see, people looking at the job they do, where do they spend most of their time, and trying to use AI to speed up those areas that, they do repetitive work or spend a lot of time, and just, where can I use AI to improve and enhance what I do, and what they do.
Yeah, that definitely resonates with us. I mean, we internally are looking at every piece of our delivery model to figure out how we can use AI to accelerate some of that, because as these implementations are typically, they're costed or they're priced based off time and materials, and the bulk of that is time. So wherever we can save time is really a savings we can pass to our customers and accelerate the time to value for implementations. So like an example of that would be like documentation, right? Typically that was like a 40-hour to 80-hour task, going through each of the screens in the system, documenting it.
When we have these agents that can read these design documents and build models for you, you begin to build this whole library of all your implementations. And that's the starting point for an implementation of the customer, which is, oh, we did a project where we had a, planning for an airline. Well, here's our airline model. You can run your documentation through, our agent on our side, and that will go out and, design the model for you, and it gives you a great starting point.
That metadata piece is really, I think you're right, where we can build out a dimensional model on the fly, and then most of the time goes towards testing and validating that model rather than having to build it and just the mechanics of putting it together.
Yeah, if you have these generic models for different industries, you could come and say, hey, we've got our so-and-so, it'll really, or the customer has that information. I mean, they can build their design documents too and just run those through the AI to help speed up the implementation process.
Yeah. Well, I know this is a super exciting time for us. I mean, I can't think of any other time in my career for the last 18 years where things have been changing this fast on a weekly, monthly basis. Dramatically, that personally impacts my work life at least. And so I'm really thankful to have your insight here. Every time I talk to some of the folks on the Oracle product side, it really does bridge the gap between the marketing and reality. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I do. Thanks. Totally agree. I mean, everything is moving so fast. Even one of the features we thought we were going to build using a RAG model, where we provide the documentation, that's gone. I think RAG is dead just because the LLM can do it. I thought we had to build a RAG model for this, log file analyzer, but the LLM can do it, and we basically dropped it, and it's become it's simplified everything. I just can't believe how fast everything changes.
No, it's definitely incredible, and definitely lucky to be alive during this time. So,
right.
Mike, any closing thoughts?
Funny you say that, because recently as a case scope and talked to a lot of partners, and then a partner came up to me and said, oh my gosh, with this AI, you're going to put us out of business. And I had to say, well, remember when you said that to me about SaaS, however many years ago it was? I was like, it's just a new paradigm, and then you're just going to have to learn new skills. And there's so much work to do in terms of agents and AI that you're going to have more work than you ever thought you had. So, I mean, that's kind of where it is. It's another paradigm shift, but there's so much that has to be done, and everybody needs a lot of help.
Yeah, no, I mean, we start with mainframes, and then with server client, and then cloud, and then it's just the next one, right? So I'm sure humans are great at adapting, and I think that the whole community is totally on board. So thanks for all your help, Mike, and
sure.
thanks for the conversation.
No, thank you for all the support you give us too.